Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's AMPC webinar. We're privileged to have two presenters that do not need any introduction to the industry and all those that are present today, that being Stuart Shaw and Sean Starling. To help with some smooth running of today, Stuart and Sean will be asking for questions to come in. Can you please type your questions in your toolbar, and then at the appropriate times they'll actually go through a Q&A section. So during the session it will be being recorded, so if you've got anything that you want to go back or you want to share the recording, we'll make sure it's emailed out to everyone. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Sean and Stuart for today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, welcome everybody. I think we've got an amazing turnout for today's webinar. We do have 3 apologies. When you enter all of the processors who are represented today, we've got 85% of beef throughput capacity joining us on the webinar today, and 82% of small capacity being sheep, mutton and goat and lamb. So absolutely fantastic turnout, and what a great start. So we are not going to shy away that today's webinar is asking industry to consider doing R&D differently, and predominantly funding it differently to fast track it. Industry may choose that this is not a good idea. However, for the next little while during this webinar, we'll give you some thought provokers and a process we would like to take industry through to enable us all to answer that question. So where best to start but another large initiative?
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. It is for these reasons that I regard the decision last year to shift our efforts in space from low to high gear as among the most important decisions that will be made during my incumbency in the office of the presidency.
So what were some of the things that we believe enabled success of that aspirational goal? I think they had an enemy. I believe our industry has many enemies. AMPC's cost to operate report identifies some of those battles that the entire industry is struggling with. And more recently, we've had this enemy, good old COVID. And these will not go away in the near future. So are these enemies, are these common needs of our industry enough for us to think about executing and delivering R&D differently? Without doubt, there was a deadline kicked off by a Russian astronaut in space. And President Kennedy said, let's get the job done by the end of the decade. And guess what else helped? A large budget to get that job done. And this will be the scariest part of what we talk about today. So without doubt, just thinking back to President Kennedy's small speech there, many will ask, why are we wanting to do this? Why are we wanting to do it differently? And the journey will not be easy. But I always ask, what does industry choose to do? Let us not be passengers on this journey. Let us choose to either do something or not do something. Let us be passive, or let us not be passive, but make informed choices. Are we willing to postpone anything because of a lack of resources? Are we willing just to give up? Is it all too hard? And is it time to shift from a low to a high gear? I believe it is, Stuart believes it is, and we believe we can win. So what's the purpose of today's webinar? We formally want to kick off an industry engagement process. and we'll be talking to everybody post this webinar to get some feedback on, would you like to go on this journey with us? Whether industry changes the way it funds or looks at delivering R&D, we believe no matter what, this is a good process to go through. On the right-hand side there is a slide shot of what we're calling now a theme on a page. This one is beef hindquarter deboning, and Stuart will run you through a few more examples soon. But what we're proposing is to take industry, both as a collective and in private, on a journey to establish what innovation themes are important for your organisation and for your business. And once we've undertaken that journey, we'll have an idea of how much time is required for each initiative and what are realistic budgets for those to be achieved. We're not underestimating, however, over the next 6 to 9 months, the workload required by AMPC staff, supported by MLA staff, and processors hosting us on their sites and being involved in webinars like today. So how did we get to today? Approximately 4 months ago, a collective of a third party put a CRC submission to the AMPC board. Although at the time that submission was not supported in its current form, my interpretation is the board thought that sort of collective approach and thinking about things differently had merit. The board's asked us to now formally engage industry, make sure a larger part of industry is involved rather than the first CRC submission, develop the themes, and having developed those themes, agree on what the best approach is to deliver those themes. And that may be to do nothing different. One of the really important takeaways from discussions I've had with the AMPC board, our CEO here at AMPC, and representatives of AMIC is don't call it a CRC. So we've been engaged and empowered to work with industry to understand first and foremost what are still the innovative R&D themes and needs for industry, what's realistic timeframes and budgets for those to be delivered on, but don't be blinkered about the only way to do that is through a CRC submission. And so what is our planned process? Without doubt, we've got to engage AMIC, MLA and industry, and today is the first step in many steps at that. We have developed a list of possible themes. Some of you have seen them already. The rest of you will get them today or tomorrow. And we want industry to vote or delete or add to those themes that we've identified between AMPC staff and MLA. Then we'd like to get an understanding of when would you like those themes delivered for industry. I would argue with a theme, if you're happy for one of those themes to be delivered in the next 50 years, we probably shouldn't be working on it. We then want to work with industry and solution providers to understand what is it going to cost to deliver each of those themes and what's the value proposition for each of those themes. Finally, through various steering groups, we want to ascertain, having got a really good handle led by industry, what those themes are and an indicative budget, what sort of money is required to deliver those in an agreed time frame. And of course, if there's sufficient money, don't do anything different. If we believe we're short of money, look for opportunities for further investment. And just to make sure that we don't procrastinate on this for the next 3 or 4 years, we've given ourselves an internal deadline to have a board paper back to the AMPC board halfway through Q4 of the current financial year. Here is a list of the 100 themes that we've already identified and developed. I've got no doubt we haven't covered everything, and I'm also sure some will be deleted as we engage with industry further on. One of the things that's really important working at AMPC and MLA is industry makeup and how we develop solutions for all. We're getting some really, really great knowledge of throughput capacities of industry. And I think this is a really interesting table. 52% of the beef processing plants out there are 9% of our throughput. So they're more than 50% of our membership base, only 10% of our industry throughput, and their solution needs will be a lot different than someone that's in a large category. And so one of the things that Stuart and I are really mindful of as we work through this program is engaging all levels and all species catered for within this industry. We have been successful as an industry at R&D and commercialisation. No doubt we've had failures too, but let's focus on a success story and what we've learned. Blade stop. 12.8 years after the first project, 9 projects later, we've now got 83% of Australia's processing throughput adopting blade stop or Guardian or a similar solution. I can assure you that when I first put this idea to MLA and to Clyde Campbell at Machinery Automation Robotics, if we had to put these numbers up, not that we knew them back then, if we had to put these numbers up, this initiative would not have been supported. But I don't think we could argue that this has not been a good investment. And so we definitely would like to change the mindset of how we think about delivering long-term R&D projects and not thinking in a 12-month reporting cycle. And I mentioned about themes on a page. So using a historical look, because we can with blade stop, here is what a theme on a page looks for blade stop, starting with the woodworking idea, the aha moment, for want of a better word, through to various iterations, all the way through to using our industry PIP program to get early adoption and investment in commercial R&D, and now through to a commercial product. And before I hand over to Stuart, I'd like to give you one of my aspirations. A few of you may have seen this pork deboning solution at IFA approximately 9 to 12 years ago. I've been fortunate to see 2 of these machines and 2 4-quarter machines in operation in the same pork plant in France, and they would not do without them at the moment. So let's have a look at this machine underway, and I'll just point out a couple of enablers along the way. Now, although this video won't show it, the first thing to be mindful of is there's actually still 5 to 8 operational staff prior to this machine doing workup. So although the cell is fully automated, we still require, for this solution to work, skilled operational staff. In a moment, you'll see all of these hindquarters go through what we are now calling a small footprint X-ray or a small footprint DXA. And you can see that part or that primal disappearing on the right-hand side. That's actually going into the X-ray machine. And so we're on purpose calling out, using this video as an example, and Stuart will call it out later, the need to develop a small footprint X-ray and DXA system. And now you can see a range of robots all undertaking cutting line activities. Now, you won't see a subprimal or a primal be removed within this machine. This machine takes the approach of actually removing the meat from the bone, which means further down the chain after the products enter or exit this piece of equipment, you still need skilled slicing and trimming staff. And one of the other interesting things for me about this approach to technology is that most of the pork plants in Europe are all running a similar throughput. It's around the 380 to 420 head an hour. For our Australian conditions, if you think about our micro, small, medium and large processes, then you can just dial in a different number of cutting robots. And so without doubt, no matter what the size of your throughput is, we need a small footprint X-ray, and we need at least 1 robot to be able to do all of those cutting paths. So I know with my ex-colleague at Meat and Livestock Australia, Daryl Heitke, we've been to Japan, we've spoken to Miyagawa, we would love to have them develop this know-how for the beef industry. At that time, they are not interested in investing it in themselves. They may be interested if the industry is fully funding it. And so what does a theme on a page look like for this technology? Down the left-hand side, we're demonstrating what's been done in the past in the pork industry. So they had to have an X-ray solution. They probably started with a single cell robot system, developing the cut paths, and eventually over a period of time that merged into a commercial solution. What would we need to do? We need to develop a small footprint X-ray. We could undertake some single robotic cell path cutting activities. We could then merge both of those into an R&D room at a meat processing facility, so not inline, but within the four walls, and eventually get that into a full production machine. And I've estimated that that's a $15 to $20 million activity over 6 to 7 years. What's the value proposition? Great question, still to be worked through, but just taking it at face value, Stuart's program at the moment at AMPC has in the order of $5 million a year to invest every year. So if we wanted to get on with this journey, we could do just this one task and maybe something else during that time period. And so now I'm going to hand over to Stuart, who's going to take you through a few other thought provokers on where else do we innovate and how do we think about getting on with this journey. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Sean. It's great to be here this afternoon. So imagine that every carcass before it enters the bone room is marked. So when I say marked, it's got markings on it that's been identified through an X-ray system or a DXA system. Each mark will identify cut lines or critical cut lines. And imagine what that would do for your production and your process. So we're undertaking a process at the moment where we're developing a proof of concept system both in lamb and in beef, and basically taking this concept to the point where we can acknowledge to the industry what we believe is possible. So in order to do that, in moving forward, we need, as Sean mentioned before, equipment and technology such as a small footprint DXA to fully grasp this technology and take it to all of industry. Where we plan to test it at the moment, we'll have full DXA systems installed. However, to fully take this system to adoption level, we would have to have an enabler such as small footprint DXA. You can see a short video on the bottom right-hand side there of this. So before leaving here, we have got interest in this area, but we're very interested in who else sees interest in this area. So as mentioned, the small footprint DXA is an enabler. It's an enabler for equipment such as carcass marking. The small footprint DXA is an enabler for small, medium, large plants to get involved in automation. Or indeed, if not automation, semi-automation, or if not semi-automation, to enable accuracy, and to enable accuracy through cutting line accuracy through marking, and being able to assist manual operating systems. So again, the big question we've got here, we see value in this, and we need to get feedback from our industry partners, as in, where do you see the value in equipment such as the carcass marking and such as the small footprint DXA systems. Strip loin processing. So acknowledging that there's fundamentally three components to this. We've got removal from carcass of primals, we've got processing and grading, and we've got fat trimming or customer specifications. Today, we're only going to concentrate on the customer specifications, but there is work currently happening and happened in the past with regards to removal from carcass and the process and grading components. If we look at customer specifications, what do we have to do here? And what will we achieve? What's the value proposition? Is there a value proposition to identify where the cut line is, or the seam between the fat and the lean meat to assist an operator? So if we go down the path of developing the technology from a sensing component point of view, can we then take that and provide an operator assistance device? In other words, provide the operator with the information to know where to cut. In parallel to this, and assuming that the sensing is achieved, which we believe is very much possible, not using a DXA system, but using more fundamental sensing, then we would also look at developing automation in this area, through the development of tooling and the automation of itself. But don't forget, there is an option to take this technology from a sensing component and actually provide an assistance for operators. Pick and pack. So in the years that I've been involved in the industry, everyone always talks about they want the ability to take primals, put them in a bag, identify what's in that bag and identify what primal's in that bag, and basically put that into a carton and send that down the line for packaging and for palletising and storage, etc. So without doubt, there's been a lot of work in this area over the past years. There's been some very fundamental R&D and some proof of concept trials being completed. And indeed, we've got 2 underway at the moment. We've got one for a robotic system, which will be packing primals into a carton. And we've just recently completed, or one of our providers has just recently completed a system for identifying primals on the conveyor belt. So again, we definitely see a need. I see feedback from the processors that I visit to develop this to the next level. So we want to take some of these early stage developments, some of the current projects, and move away from the proof of concept work and start looking at getting these systems on plant and running. Complete Bonein room traceability. We believe that's possible, if not today, in the near future. There's many initiatives underway or past initiatives. You know, components such as RFID labels on cartons and on primals. We've got the work I just mentioned for identifying primals in bags and primals on belts. You know, we've got QR codes. We've got systems that are currently being tested using vision technology to track and trace the primals as they move through the boning room, for example. So that work will be completed in the near term, but moving forward from that, obviously we need to take these to the production site and you know, work on installation and integrating with newer systems, current systems, and basically, you know, go down that path of Industry 4.0 and all the other benefits that traceability obtains for us. You know, what else does it give us? It gives us the ability to provide better automation. It provides information for automation, and it gives you feedback on proof of load, etc. So again, very interested and look forward to feedback in this area as who would be interested and who has currently got initiatives in this area. Loadout, or the back end of the room. So who wants to have the back end of the room completely organized? You know, organized, less labor, more traceability, to be able to know where every carton is, to be able to automate the port marking, for example. So there's been many systems developed and indeed installed, and particularly in larger processing plants for storage and retrieval, palletising, etc. There's work to be done for, I guess, lower volume palletising and sortation. There's definitely work to be done in the traceability from a port marking perspective. There's definitely work to be looked at from an AGV, automated vehicle perspective, you know, removing forklifts from this area. And there's definitely initiatives in both truck loading and container loading. So I guess the areas highlighted in green here are, you know, areas that we want to concentrate and put an effort into over the coming years. In particular, if we look at carton sortation and or carton palletising, again, larger systems for larger plants definitely are out there. There's no doubt there is a solution available for this component. And indeed, there's many installations in this area. However, there is a need, and certainly from my understanding, a want to be able to provide a solution in smaller plants without, they don't have the footprint, for example, or the capital expenditure to put one of these systems in, or even just purely the value proposition is not there. So again, interested in who would open up to looking at what the value proposition is in developing another system in this area. You know, what can achieve that sortation and what can get those cartons onto the pallets and give you all the other traceability and so forth. Look forward to feedback in this area too. Recent years have seen a few journeys in lamb processing and lamb primal cut, for example. So there's definitely systems there and being developed and proven successful for primal cutting in lamb. There's some systems that are being developed for beef scribing or rib cutting, etc. And there's certainly a lot of initiatives in this area. That's development that's continuing to this point. So acknowledging that we have goat and mutton processors on this journey with us, there's a need to rethink some of the work that's been done in the past as well. So an example of this is six-way cutting. Six-way cutting is a project that was deemed very necessary some years back, and there were some attempts to get that correct. And we want to rethink that process and reevaluate the value proposition and understand from the processes in this room, is this an area where we should be spending time? Should we look at redeveloping or at least rethinking that and taking on some newer technology that's now available that wasn't available in the past, and actually overcoming some of those OH&S issues and refrigeration issues all associated with hot cutting of goat and mutton in the six-way process. On this same theme from goat and mutton, often over the years, what has been put forward to me is not a solution for cutting or cubing bone-in product, particularly bone-in product that's fresh or hot and not frozen. For many years, I've looked into this, and we haven't really found the solution until recently. Some providers have offered a potential area that we may want to look at. But again, before we go down this path, before we take it further, we need to try and get an indication, is there still a value proposition for the industry, and is this something that you would like to move forward with? I believe that tubing of bone-in hot product is now possible. However, we would need to take that to the point of view where we do some R&D and do some trials and prove that concept. So again, interested in feedback in that area. Beef splitting. I think the first ever plant that I visited many years ago, beef splitting was in the conversation, and I think it was in the conversation every time I've been on a beef processing facility over the past 15 to 20 years. About 10 years ago, back to 2010, prior to 2010 I should say, that there was a number of development projects in that area and a number of proof of concept trials, and they had semi-success. However, there has been no investment in this area in Australia since 2010. However, it remains to be a process that is often spoken about. In the USA and Europe, there has been providers that have been working in this area. So the big question for me is, do we get on with it? Do we now look at engaging processors, engaging some of these providers, and actually look at implementing beef splitting and trialing it in Australia? So that's a big question for me. Small stock brisket cutting. I'm using brisket cutting here as an example, but there is parallels to many other similar technologies. Past R&D has been done over the past 10 or 15 years, and indeed there was a number of these types of systems put on site and in production. Some remain in production today. However, there's no doubt there is a need to improve on these learnings and these products. Most lines now will operate at over 600 carcasses per hour. And new technology is now available, bagless robots, etc. And there's new ideas for speeding up the process and being able to get better sterilization, etc. So the question for me is, would we like to take technology such as brisket cutting to the next level, where it's not installed in 1, 2, or 10 plants in Australia, but it's installed in every plant in Australia? Wouldn't that be a good thing during this COVID period, that we have one less person on the processing floor, one less person to be in contact? So with brisket cutter in mind, again, I mentioned there's a number of technologies that have been developed in this area. The adoption has not been great, but for good reasons, I guess, and we need to look at all of those reasons and look at the whole picture. Do we need to think bigger? And do we need to look at brisket cutting, whole line technology or even just sections of technology I highlight here, pelt off to trimming automation, for example. This is possible. It's indeed possible, but we do need engagement and an understanding. Does the industry see a value proposition in developing this to the next level? So before I move on to the next slide, I guess I'll hand over to Sean and he'll continue some of this work and maybe take us a bit further and we can answer more questions. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. So Stuart's given you an example of 10 to 15 innovative themes on a page. Are they good for industry? We don't know. We've got our own views. We're going to litmus test that with everyone that's willing to talk to us about it. However, having shortlisted or agreed on what the list of innovative themes are for us to see through over the next 10 to 20 to 40 years, we can develop a spreadsheet. This is very academic, but we can develop a spreadsheet such as the one that you're seeing on the screen now. I believe, I found it online, I believe this is truly the Apollo budget spreadsheet. And what's really interesting for me on this, and often if somebody does not want to support large R&D programs in the industry, the first call they make is that a balanced portfolio? And often they ask that question to shut it down, and often they ask that question with a 12-month mindset. So let's have a look at the NASA balanced portfolio. Over that life of that period, it was not a large majority of their overall spend, but without doubt, there was a ramp-up period, there was a point at which there was a large majority of their spend, and then there was a ramp down and an exit strategy. And I think one of the things we don't talk about enough in the R&D world is what is our exit strategy? When is enough is enough? The other things that come to mind is there were enablers. There was no point strapping a man into a capsule if you didn't know you could get that capsule off the planet. Then there was a ramp up, and without doubt, there's been value-added activities ever since putting man on that moon. And I think the job for us around advanced manufacturing R&D is to work through both those green and cyan boxes. One of the other frameworks we've introduced to AMPC recently, and once again, it's a NASA-derived framework, is technology readiness levels. And we're finding it a really good way to have a conversation with providers about truly where is your technology up to. Get rid of some of the smoke and mirrors. We're also finding it a really good way to share internally how far down the journey a technology development is. And so you'll see us using this terminology quite a lot. We also believe it gives us an idea of where the R&D should be undertaken and how it should be funded. So arguably from technology readiness level 1 to 4, that's probably okay that it's done in an engineering workshop or a university laboratory. You don't need necessarily a lot of product. Maybe you need one hindquarter a month. But there comes a point where you need to get it into a processing facility. You definitely don't want to put it in mainstream production line and be shutting the plant down every 10 minutes, but you definitely need access to product real time under the right conditions and not throw that product in the bin. And then eventually you need to move that prototype as a production model into the processing shop floor. And I think one of the challenges always for this industry, and I don't think it's gone away, is we need industry R&D rooms. We need on-site processing R&D rooms, and we need to keep evolving a workable model. A model where the processor with hosting the R&D room is rewarded for their pain, but those that aren't hosting don't feel like the host is getting an unfair commercial advantage. And I actually think this will be one of our key challenges of changing the way we do R&D moving forward. And what's the journey we want to take industry on? Or what journey would we like industry to enable us to do? So we'd like AMPC and MLA staff to work with you to understand what are the 50 plus, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 150 innovation themes you want finished for this industry. As part of that process, we'll agree with input from solution providers how long that journey is likely to take for each theme and what sort of budget's required. And that will start to generate that NASA type Apollo spreadsheet. And then we can have an informed decision. pertaining to, should we be seeking more funding than we've currently got, or are we happy for $111 million as an example of R&D need to be delivered over the next 25 years? Where might some of that new investment come from? This would be an obvious place to look, but it's not the only one. And without doubt, AMPC and I'm sure MLA are having a look at what are the metrics or what are the triggers around this announcement. But this could be one of the many opportunities for industry. And I'm sure that if we've got the representation that we've got today continues on this journey and we can put a united front up to any funding government organisation or any funding organisation, we will increase our chances of success. I also think we probably need to go to more than one funding opportunity. And next steps. So here's our first hit out at developing a list of possible themes. There's slaughter themes, there's boning themes, there's packing themes, there's food safety themes, there's traceability themes, there's virtual reality themes, you name it, we're thrown it on the page, but I'm sure we've missed some. And I'm sure some of the ones we've put on the page, industry doesn't want. So we will be calling out to every participant as a company representative to understand, would your company like to work with us on these themes? Understand what themes are viable or a need for your business. Work through with us what the value proposition might be. And then we'll also be engaging solution providers and yourself to agree on what realistic timeframes and budgets are. And we'll start that process Monday. And I'd now like to hand over to Q&A. So I believe, Amanda, that's back to you.
Thanks, Sean and Stuart, for a very informative session. Just at this point, we don't have any questions coming in from the audience. So I just want to clarify, on your taskbar, there is a question mark. If you click on that, you can actually type in a question and it will come through.
And Amanda, just while that's happening, if I just recap, so this session has been recorded. We will email a link out for that next week, I'm assuming?
Yes, we will, as well as a copy of your presentations.
Excellent.
And speaking of that, we've just had a question come in saying, can we please get a copy of the presentation? And we'll make sure that that will get out to everyone that's on here. And I believe it will also be open to the wider industry after today. Today was a closed house session for AMPC members, AMIC and MLA staff.
Correct. And just on that, Amanda, yeah, so please share that with solution providers, universities, because now we want to ramp up that side of the engagement. The other thing is we will send the PowerPoint through as a PDF. We will also make available the non-PDF version, but it's approximately 50 or 60 megabytes with the videos. So when we send out the PDF, if anyone would like the original PowerPoint version, for want of a better word, we just need to talk to you about what your file sharing preferences are.
Fantastic. While we're talking, Sean, got a question for you. In terms of technical capacity and capability within industry, we've got a fantastic vision of advanced manufacturing moving forward and what the potential is. What do you see the potential need is for industry to make sure that we have the right skill set and requirements for the industry in a human capacity moving forward?
And so on that A3 page with our themes on a page, down the bottom right-hand side, which nobody can see, I'm happy to acknowledge that, there was a cop-out of a call-out where Stuart and I said, let's not forget about the people side of this process. We are definitely not the people side experts, but we've at least remembered to call it out. And the sorts of headings we've got there are, we need to evolve operational staff to assisted staff. So rather than them being on a knife now, they might be in front of a computer or on a joystick driving a piece of equipment. So we think there's some evolution there. There may be some evolution with the shop floor staff around virtual reality, augmented reality, those sorts of tools. So without doubt, there's some upskilling of existing operational staff that have currently got knives and boning hooks in their hands. Without doubt, there's an upskilling process required around maintenance and production supervision on what this equipment can or can't do. They might even need, if you think about the Maya-Gower pork hindquarter deboning solution. You know, if you walk into a boning room, a beef boning room now, well, most of the ones that come to my mind, we're progressively dropping the primals away from the bone. Whereas that one there, you're dropping the bone away from a cluster of primals. Now we'll need to reskill staff on different cutting requirements. They'll have it in them, I've got no doubt about that, but training will be required. And then there's the other side of outside of the processing plants, what additional skills we need. So that's going to be engineering support companies, it's going to be new universities. When I say new university skills, universities and solution providers now being hopefully attracted to industry because there's a decent size of the prize to go after. And one of our limitations, I think, for the last 20 years is although we've attracted some new companies to the table, we've almost had to put our eggs in a very few number of eggs in the one basket. And so we mentioned before, and I don't want to harp on this because it's got some negative connotation, but if we can develop smaller footprint X-ray systems and carcass marking, that means that provider, and we're talking to 3 or 4 different providers, their job then could be to mark a carcass up. Then any automation company, they could be 2 people big, they could be your on-site automation team, can take those carcass marks and actually automate carcass cutting. And one of our limitations to now has been we've had to rely on a company who are automation experts to also deliver that sensing expertise. And it's just a tough job to do.
I agree. And, you know, I think there's a whole raft of career opportunities out there within the industry for this. And it also opens up further to the type of employee we can bring on as well, you know, that may not be able to do the physical requirements currently of the jobs that we have. We may be able to, you know, as you say, sit at carousels with joysticks and things like that, and then that opens up to a whole new demographic. So we have got a question coming in, and it's around funding models. So question always remains about how plants get financial acknowledgement for R&D development before R&D is actually approved or executed by AMPC, MLA, etc. Industry often moves faster in R&D due to internal requirements and expectations, and often really good projects never get to industry published because the processor has simply moved faster than the financial support projects. How do we approach this?
I love this question, and I don't know who asked it, and I don't need to know Amanda, but hopefully they know me well enough that you know the reason why I've got no hair is I've struggled with that for the last 20 years myself, both inside AMPC and MLA and as a service provider. So without doubt, approval processes currently, arguably for all of the right corporate governance reasons, don't keep in step with commercial needs. And I think one of the biggest hurdles around that is that we've got such a small amount of funding trying to make sure it's distributed equally amongst all of the activities we do. Maybe it's way too aspirational, but I think if we've got a really well articulated, laid out, what are the 50 themes this industry wants to do, what are they going to cost, then I think that process, although it needs checks and balances, it's at a completely different level. It's not at a project level anymore, it's more at a program level. So don't disagree with the question, but I think scale helps that be faster.
Absolutely. And I think now that we've got the co-innovation managers in each state as well, really encourage processors when they start to have the thought bubbles to have the conversations with the co-innovation managers, because then if those thoughts can start getting adopted and fleshed out in an earlier time, because often we're finding out when the plant's already decided that's what they want to do. If we can be having part of that thought bubble process, we can be starting to get the application approved in principle, is one possibility. Do you see, Sean?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, although at times it may look like the 2 industry bodies take 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, I think people sometimes forget how long it took to get approval in their own businesses too. It's just that we're the last hurdle. But
Right.
not wanting to lock down on that. I mean, that's more about, I think, our industry PIP funding mechanism, which actually absolutely complements what we're talking about today. And we can always be better.
Something we can continue to strive to improve. So we now changing the topics to around priorities. Sean Stuart, priority is probably primarily a matter of 1, operational imperatives, particularly compliance, etc. And secondly, highest planned return on investment could either be decreasing costs or increasing revenue. I understand this is an individual plant issue to some degree, but how do you see that the projects can be prioritised, classified on this basis?
Yeah, so my first response, and once again, it's an aspirational response, but then I'll dig into a bit more detail. Wouldn't it be great if we were sufficiently funded that we didn't have to make our limited fundings make a choice between project A or project B if they're both good for industry? So what am I saying in that? We've got a finite, and you will always have a finite resource. There's no ifs or buts. But Stuart's got $5 million a year at the moment, which is a lot of money. I'm not being disrespectful to the tune of that money. But to undertake, you just heard 10 or 15 initiatives today. We think there's 100. So when you're limited to that sort of quantum, but empowered or excited about that many number of needs across industry, then there's always choices to make. And rightly or wrongly, those choices are made sometimes correctly and I think sometimes incorrectly. And why are those choices being made? Because we're financially restrained, we believe, to do all the things that industry keeps asking us to do. And so the process that we want to engage industry over the next 3, 6, 9 months is remind us again, tell us again, and we'll pressure test it with you. What are your imperatives? What are your themes? If every site could come up with 20, maybe in total we've got 50. And then we can have a conversation about if they are all important, because one's a goat one, one's a mutton one, one's a large beef one, one's a small sheep one. If they are all important and industry wants them done before we're all dead on this call today, then we know the size of the prize we need to seek to enable that.
But the priority is largely driven by you guys on the other end of this line, you know?
Yeah.
We need that feedback in order to help prioritize, regardless of the funding model or the method that we go ahead. That priority, our priorities are often, we try and align our priorities every day, but we need feedback every time to understand what your priorities are.
So staying on the theme around funding, you mentioned the possibility of an industry-funded CRC. I understand that CRCs are a fantastic source of funding that can accelerate R&D and adoption, but wouldn't a CRC complete with or duplicate the activities of AMPC and MLA? Alternatively, how would they complement each other?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that question, and I don't have an answer to either side at the moment. Hopefully we'll have an answer over the next 6 to 9 months. But one of the clear takeaways we have got thus far through this process is that we've been told not to think about engaging in just a CRC concept for the following reasons. One is you have to, as the person asking the question alluded to, you have to form an additional company that comes with administration costs, auditing costs, staff costs, when you've clearly already got AMPC and MLA. So that's one of the couple of reasons why we've been advised not to fixate on a CRC. I wanted to acknowledge that we did have a CRC submitted to us, and good on that person or that group of people for showing that initiative and putting that up to AMPC. So I think that was a great thought bubble, but we've been clearly instructed not to drive this as a CRC. Now, having said that, at the end of this process, if industry says, you know what, doesn't matter how many great themes we've got, doesn't matter how fast we want them done, we actually don't want to invest anymore as an industry or be held accountable by who gives us the money to do any more than $5 million a year. However, if industry, and that's the end of it, there'll still be a good process to go through. We'll also have a really clear picture on what needs to be done and a really good indication of how long it's going to take. However, going through that process, if industry decides they want to turbocharge it, they want to fast track it, then I think we sit down as an industry collective and say, what are the different ways we can fund that? And it might be a CRC, it might not be. It might be 30% from one funding opportunity and 40% from another.
And we've had a comment come in to say R&D is a slow process, irrespective of funding history and funding history shows. So we're going to change the questions up and go to small footprint DXA. So the question comes in, small footprint DXA seems a core enabler for several themes. If companies such as, now I'm going to get this wrong, Meequa have developed small footprint DXAs for pork, why does this industry have to develop it through the R&D program?
So a two-part response. The only conversation that Daryl Heidke and I have had with that provider was trying to encourage them to put 50% on the table and industry would throw the other 50% on, and they just were not interested in that funding model. And so the only other way we can do that is do that through Stuart's core program. And if we get on that journey, then there's another 10 things, and I've made that number up, we can't do for the next 2 years. And that's where the crux of this whole webinar comes from. If we want all these things done within a certain amount of time, we don't have enough investment to do it. And we want to make sure industry's had a conversation about that, an informed conversation, and made an informed decision. And the decision might be, just keep doing what you can do with what you've got.
So obviously understanding the importance of mechanisation and automation of the labour-intensive process. However, turbocharging of R&D of energy service efficiency practices and the W2P to provide faster outcomes. Certainly great use and application of these technologies in Europe than in Australia, and should be included in the advanced manufacturing programs. What's your thoughts on that?
Don't disagree, and they're the conversation we want to have. So yeah, tell us what should be in it. Like I said, I never like to start with a blank bit of paper on any conversation. More than happy to put 100 dot points down and have them ripped apart, told that we've got 50 right, 50 wrong, and we've got about 10. That's a fantastic conversation for us to be having.
Okay, and if the industry suggests around 50 R&D themes, we will have enough suitable, will we have enough suitable service research providers to do the projects justice, or will we be just at risk of watering down the R&D themes?
So I think the only way we'll get more providers to industry, whether they be university researchers and or commercial solution providers, is to have a really good carrot. At the moment, we're having trouble attracting them to this industry. Because at the moment, the model we're offering is you put 50% on the table and we'll put the other 50% on for that front-end development work. And that's holding us back.
Also, having the 50 themes or whatever that number is allows these providers to have a constant flow of work. Quite often what we see is the on again, off again in development in this space, which is not good for providing the provider the opportunity to maintain the skills on his facility that he needs to continually look at R&D. So if called provider X, for example, only gets one job and he gets that one job once every 2 years, then that's not enough to keep that process going and keep it continuous and to keep those skill levels going.
Great. Now the next comment question that's come in is really excited about the co-innovation managers that have now been put in place, and especially happy that Western Australia has now got a local. Well done, Blair. They love you over there. Many equipment manufacturers have these R&D development rooms, labs available, and it would be good to have these R&D labs available in regions or states. Plants that actually have real estate available to set up such an R&D lab would be far and few between. Is it not time that the AMPC actually invest in such a facility for industry? This then can become an innovation R&D hub.
Yes, so what the model and what the components of those R&D rooms look like as a whole model is still to be decided. I can tell you from first-hand experience, there comes a point, and it's not right at the front end, where unless you're on a processing facility, harvesting the raw material you need for the innovation that you're doing, so it might be a hind quarter of beef, it might be half a lamb carcass, it might be the strip loins. Unless you're on a facility able to get them when you need to get them at the required processing temperature, and then not throwing that product in the bin, it becomes cost prohibitive to do R&D up around those middle TRL levels. So imagine, so without doubt, there's a role for off-site R&D centres, not denying that at all. And in addition to those, we must have established on-site R&D rooms. If you need to run 2,000 sides, 2,000 carcasses through a beef splitter before you actually put it in line, who pays for that? Because all that product's probably going to get thrown in the bin if you've taken it off-site. But it doesn't hurt to do the first 10 carcasses off-site.
Great, fantastic. Well, thank you very much to both Stuart and Sean for today's webinar. It's been fantastic. There's been a lot of engagement, and I know that you've done a lot of background work in preparing for the event, and you'll also be making contact with all the members that have been on today's session. So once again, thank you for your time and effort. Just want to also remind people that next week we're changing themes, and we're going to have Jason Ollington from the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment give an update on everything that's happening in the department. Also the new refrigeration index, where that is up to, and some market access for the US and China mainly is what he's going to be talking about. So that's next Thursday at 2 p.m. So once again, Stuart and Sean, thanks very much, and you'll get in contact with everyone. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks for your time, everyone.